Hi, everyone. Happy Friday. And thank you for joining us for the Ohio AAP Parenting at Mealtime and Playtime program Q1 webinar. At this time, I want to thank the Ohio Department of Health for their support with this project. And thank you to everyone that was able to join and everyone that uses our resources and has attended our trainings in the past. Today, our training will be on body image and motivational interviewing. Dr. Sarah Adams and Dr. Eileen Chavez will be presenting today, and they will introduce themselves in just a few moments. Just a few housekeeping items at this time. Please make sure that your cameras are off and your lines are muted except for the speakers. And during the presentation, if you have any questions, feel free to put those in the chat box and they will be answered at the end of the presentation. Just a few reminders of the wonderful PMP resources that we have available with the support of the Ohio Department of Health. We have the Ohio AAP PMP mobile app. You can download this on the Apple Store or Google Play. And if you want to, go ahead and download that today. Our AAP PMP resources are available on there, as well as videos, great tips. And then you can access all of our PMP resources at the link provided there on our website. And this includes resources for older ages now too, and we'll even be extending up to age 18 this year, which is exciting. We still have our PMP toolkit available, and you can register via the link there. And then our speakers do not have any disclosures. And if you could please complete the pre-survey in order to receive your certificate at the end, you must complete the pre-survey, and the post-survey will be sent out on Monday. If there's any questions about that, please let me know. There's one CME and one MOC Part 2 credit available for attending. At this time, I will go ahead and pass it over to the speakers today. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us, and please let us know if there's any questions in the chat box today.
Hello, everybody. I'm Sarah Adams, and I am a pediatrician at Akron Children's Hospital, and I want to welcome you all to this very important topic. And I am the PMP medical director, so this is something that's very near and dear to my heart. And Dr. Chavez, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Eileen Chavez, and I am the pediatric obesity psychologist at Nationwide Children's Hospital, and I work in the Center for Healthy Weight and Nutrition.
Well, it's an honor to speak to all of you, and especially an honor to speak with Dr. Chavez today. So we're going to talk today about body positivity and how it impacts our children, but also the families, and identify what actually influences how children feel about their bodies. We're going to talk also ways to develop a positive body image and develop a plan for motivational interviewing in your own practice. The bottom line is, hopefully when we're done, you'll know a little bit more about how anyone, children, even adults, are influenced about how we feel about ourselves, and also have a way to actually talk to our families that's effective and meaningful. Next slide, please. So this came from the Cleveland Clinic, and it states, in a large context, body positivity is a social movement that advocates for the acceptance of all bodies, regardless of size, shape, skin tone, gender, or physical abilities. And this is a quote from Dr. Albers. She adds that this movement challenges unrealistic beauty standards and ideals, and that the central concept is the idea that beauty is constructed by society and should not determine someone's self-worth or value. Next slide. Another definition of body positivity refers to the assertion that all people deserve to have a positive body image, regardless of how society or pop culture views the ideal shape, the ideal size, and appearance. Next slide. So as you can see, there's all kinds of definitions about what does this actually mean about being positive, about the way you look, your skin color, your culture, etc. And really appreciating your body despite any flaws that you may have. Feeling confident about your body, loving yourself, and accepting your body's shape and size. Next slide. So the goals here are to challenge how society views the body, promote the acceptance of all bodies, and help children really build that confidence and the acceptance of who they are in their own body, and really addressing those unrealistic standards. Next slide. There are so many things, though, that influence how children feel about themselves, how they look in the mirror, for example, and think of themselves. And let's start by talking about what actually influences how this body image is created. Next slide. So we're influenced by size and shape, race, gender, and disability. And as I mentioned before, media influences are really huge. The food you eat, the exercise, the clothes you wear, health, identity, and even self-care. And so what we want to be able to develop is a healthier and more realistic relationship with our bodies. Next slide. Many things influence how children see themselves, but I want to remind you that parents and families play a very critical role in how children develop that self-esteem and how they see themselves or feel about themselves. It's hard to escape the ideal body image that's promoted in media, and this is unfortunately even exacerbated by interaction with friends. But I want to remind you too that children also learn by just observing the adults in their lives and the body language that they get from their own family and the people that they are surrounded by every single day. Next slide. Body image refers to a person's subjective perception of their own body, which can feel different about how their body actually appears. We've heard this before, and it can go from one scale to another. Next slide. So where do we start to form these thoughts about how we look and how we should look? And I want to remind everyone that young children suffer from this as well. Kids as young as 3 to 5 years of age are already worrying about their body weight. 50% of girls, 30% of boys aged 6 to 9 felt that their ideal body weight should be less than what their current weight is. And there are even kids, a fourth of children are already doing some kind of dieting before age 7. They're already getting those words heard to them. He's fat, she's fat, I'm fat, I feel ugly. I wish I was as pretty as someone else. And children refusing food due to fear will make them fat. It starts in those very early childhood developmental years and then continues from that point on. Next slide. So the building blocks of this belief comes from that thought of needing to be perfect. I try to say in my practice, we always say practice makes perfect, and I've changed my own tone to say practice makes better. But that perfectionist mindset can start very young, and it continues throughout their childhood, adolescent, and even into adulthood. They're not satisfied with their body. They feel like a perfect body would make them happy or would earn them acceptance from others or love, admiration, attention. And they identify that perfection by the number on the scale or the size of clothes, and they'll do anything to have that perfect body. Next slide. So what age groups are affected the most? I mentioned that these thoughts can start as early development, like 3 to 5 years of age. But let's think about the adolescent for a moment. The adolescent is in that crucial age of development. their body is starting to change. They're going through puberty. They're not sure about these physical changes. And so that's what starts to influence those body ideals. Their changes in their weight, their height, their body shape, their composition. And they're starting to have secondary sexual characteristics. And this happens to coincide with the same time that they are exposed to those cultural ideals of beauty. Recent studies indicate that current diet, exercise, and beauty trends displayed in like even reality TV shows and social media can contribute to these unhealthy adolescent body perceptions. Next slide, please. So I've put a lot of information here, and I know it's a lot, but I wanted you to have all the information so that you can go back and read it and listen to it. But you can see that there have been several studies to show that there are a lot of influences on weight, on appearance dissatisfaction. And these studies have really shown that it affects the child's body image, their concerns. It shows also that they're already getting teased and criticized, and that the discussion of their appearance is in the forefront of what these children and adolescents have to worry about, when they should really be worrying about their schoolwork and maintaining, healthy mental as well as physical attitude. But what's so important is that the research does show that even weight-based teasing from parents and siblings plays a big factor. Girls feel that they should strive to be thinner because they feel that they're going to be more attractive. And boys think that they'll be more attractive by being more muscular. And unfortunately, in the last study for Paxton et al., it even shows that 85% of boys did indeed perceive thinness as an attractive quality in girls. Next slide, please. So I'm going to hand over the rest of this discussion with Dr. Chavez.
Hello, everyone. So I just wanted to pick up where Dr. Adams left off and really sort of talk about weight status and body image that occurs in adolescence. So I have the immense honor and privilege of working with children and adolescents with obesity. And time again, we know as a society, and we certainly know that with COVID, rates of overweight and obesity have increased. And it has increased for children across all ethnicities, all races. Pre-pandemic, those kids that were in that sort of normal BMI range, but at like the top of that range, unfortunately really kind of got pushed over into that overweight range, and kiddos in that overweight range often got pushed over into the obese category of BMI. So for these kids with overweight and obesity, a lot of times they come in with higher BMIs, and then they already have concerns about their body image. When I meet with families, I always ask, have you ever been teased or bullied because of your weight, your size, or anything else? Because I want to really gauge if that's part of what is going on for them. And we know from the research that kids and adolescents with these sort of higher BMIs, coupled with concerns about body image, often equate to having sort of lower quality of life as adults. And so that is both physical quality of life, like being able to actually do different activities. That is related to, like we're talking about body image, their ideas about themselves, how it impacts relationships with other people, how it affects their mental health. So depression, anxiety, social anxiety, all of those kind of things can be impacted. So when we talk about body image, I really want us to think about the idea of weight bias and internalization, right? So this is really the idea that everything people are seeing in society about bodies, about fatness, thinness, the way we need to look, our appearance, we can then unfortunately internalize and kind of use against ourselves. When I talk with patients about it, I usually talk about thinking about like if your mind is like a cork board, like things get stuck to it, right? And unfortunately, some of those negative things that we have heard from other people in our lives, like our family members or our peers, or even medical professionals or other well-meaning people, if we perceive them as really negative or they genuinely are negative, it's really harder to get those off our mental cork board, right? And then we start to internalize those and we believe those messages about ourselves. And that can be really detrimental to both our physical and mental health. And it can cause us to act in ways that can be really, unfortunately, harmful to ourselves. And we can then put a lot of pressure on ourselves. So when we are kind of thinking about how we want to talk to adolescents about their weight and their body, I think watching our language and using different language is really important. And we're going to talk more about that here in a minute. But I just kind of want to make everybody kind of aware of that, because you might have kiddos that come in and they have a lot of internalized weight bias and stigma. And so they're thinking a lot of negative things about their body. They may be really dieting. They may be engaging in really restrictive eating behaviors. And when you talk to them more about it, they have internalized all of those sort of negative messages that they've received from all of these different locations. Next slide, please. So again, this is just to kind of add on to what I just talked about. So we have the pressures from peers, right? Like, the clothes that are in or trending. I have a lot of patients that I work with that say, I am really into fashion, but I don't feel like I can wear the kind of clothes that I want to wear because they don't make them for my body size. Or even if they do make them for my body size, they don't look the way that I would like to look in them. So you have those kind of pressures. You have like social media influence. All of the teenagers that I work with are on all of this social media that I wish I knew more about, and I should probably be on it, but I'm not as on it as they are. But like all of the TikToks that people are watching, all of the things they're seeing on Instagram, all of the other messages that they're getting from social influencers. And then I think that there is, like, I was just reading something, gosh, it was like last night, like in the metaverse, like different games that you play in the metaverse, that were fat shaming, like different virtual avatars. So there's this whole other layer, I think, as we start to move more toward having a digital life and a digital sort of image, even related to that, even related to thinking about like fat talk, thin talk. And then I know Dr. Adams was really even talking about like bullying related to like family members. In the patients that I work with and the kids and the adolescents, I would say, I think that for those kids that experience family related teasing and bullying about weight, that is particularly difficult because there's all this sort of familial expectation around what your body should and should not look like. So it's not even like, I think it's important to think about like weight related bullying from peers, but also to really ask about like what do parents kind of expect for their child's body size, their body shape, like how do parents kind of talk about food. And I work with a lot of families where either mom or dad will make negative comments about their own body, like when they're changing or putting clothes on or when they're eating or choosing what to eat, right? And little kids we all know this, little kids are like sponges, right? And they just soak all that up. And it gets internalized in ways that we were probably not intending for it to be internalized. And then I think too, when we think about like body mass index, I think we are all very well-meaning people, but I do think that sometimes like that, just even that measure, kids can get the idea that if they are in like the overweight or the obese category, what does that mean about me, right? And that can contribute to some of those issues related to body image. So we will talk a little bit about how to talk about weight further on in this presentation, but I think it's good to just kind of be aware of that when we're thinking about that. And then, of course, I've already talked a lot about like adolescents' ideas about their own body, but asking about, asking about their ideas about their body, what they what they think about their body now, the words that they use to describe their body. I think that that is always important to talk about, because a lot of adolescents that I work with do that comparison thing too, right? Where they compare their own body to the bodies of their peers, or their own body to people that they want to look like on social media. And that can then cause really negative thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that are less adaptive. Next slide, please. Okay. So what do we do with all of this? What can happen? It can lead to physical inactivity, and oftentimes that is probably because of either thoughts that, like, I can't do something, like my body won't allow me to do something as well as someone else's body. So I work with kiddos who are like, I would really love to be able to be more physically active, but I can't keep up with my peers, so I'm not even going to try, right? Like, I'm not going to join track team, because why would I do that? I wouldn't make the team, or even if I were on the team, like, I would always be in last place, and that would make me feel terrible. Or you can have physical inactivity because you're really depressed and you just don't have the energy to move more, right? And then, which can also lead to eating disorders. So we could talk, like, that's a whole nother presentation in and of itself. But, you get the kiddos that are restricting and really either limiting the types or amounts of food they're eating, or sort of creating an unrealistic calorie count in their head, a really low calorie count, and then sticking to that. Or they may be binge eating, because that is, the binge is how they are kind of trying to cope with some of those negative feelings that they're experiencing. And then I think we get these kids in the middle that have disordered eating, but maybe they don't sort of, like, it's not to the level that they are given like an eating disorder diagnosis, but they are definitely engaging in like emotional eating. And you get that pendulum thing kind of sometimes, where like they're restricting sometimes, then they're binge eating sometimes, and it does this like swinging thing in the middle, right? So it doesn't really fit any one sort of specific category. But when you talk to them about food and eating and body image, they're definitely using food emotionally to cope. And then they're restricting sometimes too, because they feel guilty because they've binged, right? It's that whole sort of presentation that looks like that. So it can definitely lead to things like that. So dysfunctional exercising, and what I mean by that is really sort of exercising to compensate for things like binge eating, right? So maybe you have just sort of felt out of control, eaten this large amount of food, and then you're like, okay, now I need to go run for 2 hours. And that's what you do for 2 hours, right? Afterward. Or you're restricting and you're like, I need to move more in order to go ahead and really even burn off these calories that I have consumed, even if I've only consumed like 500 calories all today, right? So it is moving your body in conjunction with thoughts that are sort of negative. And that's the behavior that you would see. So really low self-esteem, engaging in these really extreme diet plans. I had one kiddo that I was working with recently that was talking to me about an Anna diet. And when I asked her more about what that was, she described it as an eating disorder diet. And I looked it up, and Anna is anorexia. And it's often like the character, kiddos with eating disorders, like the name they give to that sort of character, that persona, right? And it was very, very calorically restrictive, and very limiting in the types of food you ate. So you would eat like a hot dog and a cheese stick one day, and that would be it. And then you drink like lemon water. And then the next day you would maybe add in one other food item. But then the third day you'd go back to like that really restrictive, like hot dog and cheese, right? Right. Very, very restrictive, very sort of extreme diets. So excessive exercising, we've already talked about that. And then depression. And I would also probably add in there anxiety, because I think too that I definitely work with kids that have a lot of social anxiety that then limits their ability to sort of go be more physically active. And that may be because they are worried about going to someplace public where they think people will see their bodies and see them moving their bodies. So they won't go to the gym because they're worried about what other people will think about them when they're exercising, or they will only go outside and exercise if it's really late at night and they feel like not a lot of people are out, but then it's dark, and is that safe, right? So I think that that is also in there too, that leads, like, this is all basically like a circle, right? Like, it leads then to physical inactivity, which can lead to all of these other things. Next slide, please. So what do we do with this? How do we kind of help kids and adolescents develop a healthy body image? So I think that it is really important to sort of focus on prevention of obesity. So that is, you know, like in all of the well child visits where we see kids and we talk to families about like eating a variety of foods. We talk about like eating the rainbow, right? So really kind of helping kids do that, and talking to kids about just all bodies are amazing and everybody's body is unique and different, and think about all the amazing things that your body does. Like, you know, your body allows you to get up every morning and concentrate at school and hang out with your friends and run around on the playground, you know. Your body does all of these really cool things. So talking about what your body does and what your body does for you, I think is really helpful. Again, normalizing that all bodies are different, right? And that is neither good nor bad. It is unique. All bodies are unique. And then talking about like, how do we move our bodies more? Not necessarily for weight loss, but just in general, moving in ways that sort of make us feel good and make us happy and make us feel strong. And then if we can kind of help kids figure out how they move their bodies that make them feel like that, then we can talk to them about how they can do that more, which I think is really super cool and really exciting. So even kind of taking that bent, I think kind of helps with this healthy body image. Next slide, please. Okay. Excuse me. So I think it is helpful when we think about like, how do we work with adolescents and those old, well, even kids, right? Like when we talk about weight, we want to be careful to sort of not set unrealistic weight goals. And even if we're not doing that, I think it is also helpful for us to listen to kids and adolescents and to families and make sure they're not sort of setting unrealistic weight goals for themselves or for their kiddos, right? Because what I have often found is I meet with a lot of kids who tell me, well, I first tried to lose weight at, pick an age, like 11, for example, right? And I say, well, what did you try to do back then? And they say, well, back then, you know, I decided to like exercise a lot more, and I started drinking more water, and I started eating vegetables at every meal. All of those things, great, right? And then but then they're like, but it didn't work. And you're like, oh, okay, well, what do you think happened? And they're like, well, I stopped after a week. And you're like, oh, okay, why did you stop? And they say, well, I wasn't getting to be where I wanted to be. And then I say, well, what did you kind of expect? What was your expectation for yourself? And they say, well, I thought I would lose like 10 pounds in a week, and it didn't happen. So I was like, whatever, I'm done, right? This is hard, which yes, behavior change is totally hard. But I think if we kind of help kiddos set those expectations and we make those expectations not about weight, that can be really helpful, right? So maybe the goal is not to see that number come down, because I always tell kids and families like, weight is really just a number. It's one piece of information. There's so many other things that we can kind of use to think about when we think about goals. So maybe we think about, how do we kind of like if your goal is to run more, like how can we kind of gauge if we're running more? We could do it by time. We could do it by how we feel. Like, can we run this far without taking a break in between, right? Like, or if we're taking a break, can we take a break less often, right? All of those things, we can gauge things differently. But I think it's important to sort of listen for those unrealistic weight expectations, because that definitely then impacts how kids are going to feel about themselves. Because if they expected to lose 20 pounds in a week and it didn't happen, they're going to feel like a failure. And that's going to make them less likely to try anything else that we talk to them about in the future. So again, like talking about physical activity as more of moving your body in a way that feels good for you and sort of contributes to you sort of feeling confident. And again, setting goals that are not weight-based. So again, that could be things like physical activity goals, that could be energy level. I talk to kids about like feeling, like noticing if you're feeling like you have more energy. And that could be like the foods that you're eating maybe make you feel like you're having more energy, or the amount of movement you're doing may make you feel like you have more energy. All of those things can be really helpful when we talk about how we can sort of move the needle a bit and sort of make some of these changes. Next slide, please.
I'd like to just comment for just a moment, Dr. Chavez. So many times in my practice, the kids are coming in and saying that they're tired, that they're fatigued. And so really focusing on how these changes make their body feels is so important. So that I just thought of that, I mean, many, many times. And it's like, I'm tired, I'm tired, I'm tired. So it's a very good point.
And I even talk about sometimes just like sleep interventions, right? Like if you are getting good quality sleep, then you're probably less likely to need some of those higher calorie, nutrient poor foods to sort of boost your energy level really quick, right? I'm thinking about like the really processed carbs or the sweets, right? So if we're getting different, like more sleep or better quality sleep, then our body's not making that impulsive choice to eat that sort of thing, and we can fuel our body in different ways. Because I know for me personally, like when I'm tired, I usually don't crave a salad. Like that is not my go-to thing. So even talking about that, I think is really helpful. So other interventions. So if depression or anxiety or social anxiety or even like ADHD, right? Like I work with kiddos that have ADHD and they're making really, like if they are untreated, they're making really impulsive food choices because impulsivity, of course, is a symptom of ADHD. Or when they come off their ADHD medication, they're sort of immediately hungry because we know ADHD meds often decrease appetite. So they're immediately hungry and then they're going and finding everything they can in the kitchen, right? So if we work on some of those things that are kind of getting in the way, then that is much more helpful. So when I talk to kids and families about sort of getting to be where they want to be with their health, I often use the metaphor of like a journey. And I say, if we start here and we want to end here, it is very unrealistic of us to expect you to walk at this straight line if there's this big boulder in your path. And the big boulder could be things like depression, anxiety, an eating disorder, whatever else, right? It's unfair of us to ask you to try to crawl over that and get here. So what we need to do is focus our attention here on that boulder and make it seem much more reasonable and manageable, to make it more like little pebbles that you can walk over so you can get to be where you want to be with your health. So oftentimes working on that mental health piece can be helpful to help kids kind of feel like they can actually achieve whatever it is they want to achieve with their health. If they have some of those negative internalizations, sort of helping them identify and recognize those, recognizing where those came from, and then helping them rethink them. And if they're comparing themselves to others, so for example, like comparing yourself to people on social media, do they think that like people use filters and all these other things on social media? Do they really think that those are realistic comparisons then? Is that really what they want to compare themselves to? Helping them, I think boosting self-efficacy helps boost self-esteem. So if you feel like you can achieve things, then you often feel better about yourself, which helps boost self-esteem, right? So that's about that, like creating little goals that people can work on. And we're going to talk more about that too, in order to sort of boost self-efficacy and then boost self-esteem. Having them look at media of people who engage in like, hey, so Hayes is health at every size, right? So there are definitely social influencers that really sort of talk about this message of body positivity and health at every size and shape. So kind of helping kiddos find those sort of role models. And then talking to them about peer support. So a lot of kids don't even want to talk to their friends because they don't think their friends would understand, or their friends have been critical of their own bodies. But if you can help kids find peers and family members that are those positive role models and give you support and are there for you, that can go so long. Next slide, please. Okay. So what do we do with all of this? So again, when we talk about eating, not anymore. I don't anymore talk about like healthy eating and unhealthy eating. I don't ever talk about good food and bad food. And I don't do that for a very specific reason. Those are very binary choices. And instead, what I talk about is food is fuel. And that no food is good or bad. Food doesn't have a moral value, right? Food is what it is food. So I talk about food as fuel because that allows us to sort of say, all food is food. All food fuels your body. All food helps you move. All food helps you think. All food gives you energy. All food helps you concentrate. But different types of food may help you do that differently, right? So does this mean that like you should never eat a cookie? Absolutely not. But does that mean that a cookie may be a sometimes thing? Maybe. Right? And does that mean that like eating a rainbow of foods may be something that gives you more energy and fuel? Probably, right? So if we think about food that way, then we can talk about like the different types of foods, and it's not this sort of binary good bad category. Because I think that kids fall into the like when food is talked about that way, they fall into that. And if foods are put in this like bad category, it feels like restriction. And then if they eat something from that category, they feel like they've done something bad or they are bad, which can then lead to that thinking that produces eating disorders, which is not what any of us ever intend to do. So talking about food as fuel, I've already talked about like less emphasis on that number on the scale. When I show the growth curve to families, I talk about we all know that the dots are weights, right? But I talk about them as being like pieces of information. And what I am really interested in is the day-to-day kind of behaviors that occur in between those dots, like in between those pieces of information, because that's what we have control over, right? A lot of times people don't feel like they have control over that number on the scale, but they have control over all of those behaviors, which can help then empower them to feel like they can do something, and you can work on that self-efficacy and self-esteem piece, right? So I talk about that a lot. And then sort of helping them to set these realistic goals that they feel like they actually can engage in. I always tell the families that I work with, like, I am never going to tell you what to do. I'm going to help you figure out what you want to do and can do. And then we're going to make a plan to help you figure out how to do that realistically, right? So that families and kiddos don't sort of feel like they've been given this laundry list of things that they should do. And then what do they do with that? How do they actually make that apply to their lives? Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Oh no, maybe it's, oh, there we go. Perfect. Okay.
Sorry,
okay,
I was having some trouble.
Oh, no worries, no worries. So we've already talked about eating that variety of foods. And then moving your body in order to feel sort of strong and energized. Again, I talk about like moving your body in ways that feel good to you. And so some kids will tell me that they love dancing. I'm like, great. How can we sort of do more dancing? Other kids will talk about how they love riding their bike. I'm like, fantastic. How can we do more of that, right? Some kids will tell me that, like they really want to be a role model for their younger sister and brother. And that would mean like teaching their younger sister or brother to ride a bike. And I'm like, okay, how can we teach your younger brother to ride a bike? That's great. And then sort of wearing clothes for the body that you have now. So wear clothes that you feel comfortable in, and not clothes, like not sort of thinking about like, like the kiddos who are like buying clothes that they know are too small, and then they're like things that they're aspiring to, right? How can you feel comfortable in the body that you're in right now? What makes you feel good to wear right now? And that is what it is. You can wear whatever it is you want to wear, as long as you feel comfortable and secure in it, right? Respecting your body, noticing when you're having those kind of negative automatic thoughts about your body, being aware of them. I always say awareness is the number one thing you do. And then after that, we can work on other things. We can work on sort of challenging those things. But awareness is the number one key. And then creating those positive connections with food. And so that may be like for families, like cooking together, or, you know, eating a meal that makes everybody feel good, or like having times where you're like trying out new recipes, or you're looking for recipes to get. All of those things can be really positive. And when we think about like prevention, I think that that is really helpful, because the more we can get everyone in the family involved to create those positive feelings and connections around food, I think the more helpful that is. Next slide. Okay, we've already talked about food as fuel. I do have people that come in that talk about dieting or wanting a diet plan. Parents will come and say that to us as well, and the Center for Healthy Weight. They're like, we just want a diet plan. If you could just give us a diet plan, that would be so helpful, because then we would know exactly what to do. But I usually talk to them about what that word diet means, because a lot of people have had very sort of negative experiences with dieting, and they think of dieting as being very sort of temporary. And so I'm going to do this for a little bit. I'm going to get to be where I want to be. And then, you know, I'm not going to need it anymore. And then unfortunately, if they haven't sort of changed the behaviors and the way they're eating, the weight can come back. And then you have all of those negative thoughts and all of those sort of behaviors kind of come back, right? So again, talking about food as fuel instead. We've talked about moving your body. And then like really for my parents, I've talked about the importance of modeling. But you know, I like the parents who are like, I don't take pictures. You know, I don't want to look at myself. I'm not going to do that, right? So talking about then what would it be like if parents sort of modeled being okay with looking at themselves in the mirror or in pictures? What would that be like for their kids, to sort of have their kids recognize that your body is unique and amazing, and there's no stigma around like taking photos or looking at ourselves, all of those kind of things, right? Don't use the clean plate measure of food. If kids are taught to clean their plate, and I think people know, I mean, like eating everything on their plate, right, before kids are allowed up from the table, or before kids are allowed to have dessert. Unfortunately, what that can do is that can make our kids not recognize that bodily felt sense of fullness. And so then kids are being told that they need to eat past that point in order to get their dessert, or be okay with leaving the table, or going back to play, or whatever it is, right? So helping kids sort of be confident in saying like, my body feels hungry, my body feels full, and being okay with that, I think is really helpful. We've talked about not focusing on outer appearance. So talking about, you know, like the importance of being kind and all of those other really amazing attributes that we can give kids praise for, instead of the way that they look, right? Instead of that physical appearance. Helping parents to recognize that they don't need to make every single food decision for their kids, allowing kids to have some control and autonomy. If we can empower our kids to do that and kind of just act more as guides, then we get a lot more buy-in, and it's a lot easier for kids to feel like they're not being dictated to, or they're not being like stuck in this little bitty like area of control, right? So and then for parents as well, like not only buying diet foods or fat-free foods, buying that range of fruits, vegetables, plant-based foods, lean meats, other types of protein like legumes, things like that, right? Having a variety so that we can talk to kids about those things. Next slide, please. I'm going to give it back to Dr. Adams.
So when we talk about like things that we say, we need to watch our words. And I'm just giving a couple examples that I noticed even in my own practice and my own unconscious words. Just commenting like, oh, sometimes I'll say, oh, you've gotten so big, or you've gotten so tall. And we have to be, even as pediatricians and healthcare providers, we have to be very careful about the words that we choose, because all of those things add into that internalization that we've been talking about. And the 17-year-old, for example, was a thin, tall male with an excellent BMI, but it does, saying that he was so tall, he was self-conscious about that and had some negative image of himself because he was so much taller than everyone else, for example. Another example that I saw recently was a mom in the hallway asking, what was her 16-year-old daughter's weight, and then commenting on how much she had gained in front of anybody that was walking by. So we do need to watch our words and help not only as healthcare providers, but also help our parents, families, and anybody else that the children are influenced by. Next slide. Probably one of the most concerning comments that I had from a 16-year-old female who had had abnormal weight gain in the past year, very much due to that year that they were doing virtual learning and that lack of physical activity. And she had significant anxiety, a lot of social anxiety, as Dr. Chavez had mentioned. So much so that she would isolate herself during lunch because she didn't feel worthy of even being able to eat. And she was also afraid of what others would say about her when she was eating. And so unfortunately, this had negative consequences because she would then, when I asked her, I said, well, where do you go and to eat and what do you do? And she said, well, she leaves school and she picks up fast food and she eats alone. So she's got that social isolation. She's making choices that really aren't making her body feel better. And then having that anxiety around just not feeling worthy to be eating. So these are just a few examples of some cases that I had recently. Next slide, please. And so really creating those words, like I love these quotes here, dear body, you were never a problem. There's nothing wrong with your size. You're good enough already. And it's really just trying to teach all of us and children to start to think more positively about how they feel on a regular day-to-day basis. I can't emphasize enough what Dr. Chavez mentioned about when you talk to families about food and exercise and really focusing again and again on how this makes your body feel versus saying this is good food or this is bad food, for example. Next slide, please. So back to you.
So with the last few minutes we have remaining, I just wanted to give a few tips that I think are helpful when we talk to parents, kids, and teens about eating and weight. And tip number one that I would give, if a family comes to a medical visit and they bring up any type of health concern, talking about that health concern first, even if you notice that the child may be carrying a little bit of extra weight, right? I have had lots and lots of kiddos tell me, like, I went to my doctor for an ear infection, and then they started talking about my weight. And that unfortunately makes our kids and our families want to come back to us a lot less often, and not like it was unintentional, like we were trying to help, right? But I think just being sure to sort of talk about like whatever it is the families come for first, and then use the 5 A's model, which we're going to talk about. Next slide, please. So the 5 A's model comes out of smoking cessation work, but it has been really adapted for work with people with obesity. And the 5 A's stand for ask, assess, advise, agree, and assist. And all of these are important. But I think in a lot of the work we do, the first one, ask, is super duper important and often a game changer. And so it's really just asking permission. Right? If you would go to the next slide, please, I'm going to talk about like what this actually can look like with words. Okay, so when we talk about what we would actually say to ask permission, it would be literally just to say, would it be okay if we talked about your weight today? Would it be okay if we talked about your eating today? Would it be okay if we talk about how much you move your body today, etc., right? Whatever it is, but we ask permission first. Instead of just saying, I'd like to really talk about your weight and then showing people the growth curve. I'm sure people don't do that, but asking permission is really, really important. And then if a family says, you know what, I don't want to talk about that, like accepting that and being like, okay, cool, that is no problem. I usually follow that up with, would it be okay if I asked permission to talk about that the next time we see each other? By and large, people will usually say, sure, that's fine. I ask permission whenever I talk about people's eating, and quite honestly, I've been doing this work for a while, and people usually do not tell me no. But if they would, and if they do, that is also okay, because if you respect whatever it is they're saying, that helps build that rapport, and that makes you a safe person to come back to talk about it when they're ready, right? Okay. So that assess piece is really just kind of getting more information. So how many fruits and vegetables do you, the parent, or your child eat a day? How often do you move or exercise, any of those things, play sports, whatever it is, right? And do you or your child ever find it difficult to get motivated to make different changes? And not just changes related to like eating, diet, that kind of stuff, but changes in general. We can talk about it generally, right? And then advise. So that is kind of what we would think about, like giving recommendations, talking about different recommendations for nutrition or physical activity or screen time or whatever it may be. And then agree is really helping families set a goal. So like I said, I never tell people what to do. I ask them what they would like to do. I say, even if it is a small changes build on each other. So what one thing do you think we could realistically sort of set as a goal? And then arrange, again, that's that realistic piece. That's that problem solving. If you tell me you want to eat vegetables with every dinner, how are we going to make that happen, right? Let's talk about that. Next slide, please. So very quickly, I know we're running out of time, so I just want to talk about SMART goals. So SMART goals come out of CBT. CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy. And SMART goals are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. I'm actually going to go to the next slide real quick, please, because I think that will help us talk about it better. So this is a case study. And so I wanted to just read it to you and then sort of talk about the goal that was set, and then talk about what happens when families set a goal and you set a goal with them and then it doesn't work, right? Okay, so Sarah is a 14-year-old cisgendered female who came to her well child check 1 month ago with her mom. At that time, her BMI was 37.2. She gained 9.07 kilos in the last 6 months. At the previous visit, she'd made a SMART goal to drink only 1 pop per day, which was down from the 3 she had been drinking until the next visit. That was what she had agreed on. And today's visit, her BMI has not changed, and she's actually gained 1.2 kilos. And she says that she's continued to drink the 3 pops per day. Okay, so then my question is, well, what do we do with that, right? Oh, I'm sorry, can you go back, Alex? Okay, so usually what I do is I ask families if they remember the goal that they set. And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. And if they don't, that's okay, because I can just share the goal with them. And then I always say, well, in the last month, were you able to work on that goal even once? And they may say, yeah, I did it for a little bit. And so then you talk about, well, when it actually did happen, and I don't care if it's even like just once, that's cool. I talk about like, how did you do that? How did you make that happen? What kind of was going on to help that happen? And when it didn't happen, what kind of got in the way, right? And then you're sort of assessing for barriers to that goal, and you found exceptions for when that thing actually did happen. And then we can kind of build on, well, when it went well, what were you doing? Maybe your mom wasn't buying pop. Maybe when you were going to the corner store, you had made the decision to get water instead of pop, right? Like, how can we kind of help you do more of that thing? And then also talking about, like, was there anything else that happened during the last month that made things challenging? So maybe there were more stressors. Maybe grandma came over and she stayed with your family for a month, and grandma loves Pepsi and grandma was buying, right? I don't know. But even talking about things like that, right? Was there anything else going on that made it more difficult? So focusing on the performance and not the outcome, reconceptualizing those SMART goals to one small change a day, and little things add up to build on each other, and that creates self-efficacy, and that then can increase self-esteem. So that is our presentation. If anyone has any questions, we would love to hear them.
I actually have a question, if you don't mind. One common thing that I see is parents will either tell the medical assistant that's checking in the child, or will hand me a note and they'll say, will you talk about their weight today? And I find that very interesting. So I'm curious, how do you help those parents start to build that relationship where they can talk to their child about it too?
Dr. Adams, in those instances, are they wanting you to talk about weight, or are they not wanting you to talk about weight?
Sometimes it's not, but in most cases it's, I would like for you to bring it up, because basically what they're saying in this one situation that I'm thinking of is that they're saying, you know, when I bring it up, they get very upset and they don't want to talk about it. I mean, we could apply this to really any question in regards to adolescence sometimes, but this one in particular, I tend to get like behind the scenes, hey, will you please bring it up? And I'm happy to do that, but I also want them to, I want to encourage a good relationship with their concerns with each other as well.
Right. Yeah, that's a very challenging situation, because I feel like too, you know, like if that occurred in my clinic, I think I would want to ask the parents why they were having difficult, like what typically happens if they try to bring it up, and why they feel like it's important to have me talk about it instead of us all talk about it together. And you could always bring the parent like aside and ask that, I think, but I also think maybe that adolescent has felt really judged by their parents before. And that may be the reason that they are unwilling to kind of like, they, you know, like we all know what teens do. They shut it down if they don't want to talk about it, right? So maybe they felt really judged before because maybe parents have made some negative comments about that kid's body. And so kids are like not wanting to engage with that, which I totally respect. And so I would just try to, I think I would want to be really transparent with that parent and with everybody and say, you know what, please know I hear your concern. I understand that this is important for you and you really would like it addressed, but I think I'm going to ask your teen's permission to talk about it. And then if they want to talk about it, I would love for us to all have a conversation. And if they are not in a place where they want to talk about it, maybe today is not the best time. And then you could always like work on like if teens are willing to talk about it, you know, is it difficult to talk about this with mom or dad in the room? And you could always say, would you prefer to talk about it without them in the room, right? Like, I think that that is also a valid option too. But parents are giving you that message, I think, because they think it's an important thing that they want addressed. But I don't know, I always err on the side of like asking why people are asking me to do something. So I don't know, that would be how I would approach it. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions for Dr. Adams or Dr. Chavez? Oh, here's one. When the patient shares that the parent changing the food environment would help them, but the parent is not willing, how do you approach this?
Do you want to take that one, Dr. Adams?
So what I hear you saying is that the patient is saying, I would like to eat things that are more nourishing to my body, but they feel that the parents aren't willing to take that approach. And going back to the 5 A's, I think is really an excellent way to approach that. And being able to like Dr. Chavez said, ask what are the I'm not saying boundaries, but roadblocks that maybe the parents are having in regards to making those changes. I always try when I communicate with families to really understand the story, to really try to empathize and get the story. And the best way to do that is to listen. And so my recommendation would be very much like how she answered even my question, and ask the patient, why do you feel that your parents would be unwilling? What, and really kind of asking and assessing what those roadblocks might be in order to be able to make those changes. Do you have any comments to that, Dr. Chavez?
And one real quick, and I recognize we're out of time, so I will be super quick. So it is definitely true that we have families where parents expect kids to make changes and they are unwilling to make changes themselves, right? I mean, many parents who are like, I love my soda, not giving that up, but not letting my kids have it, right? And so I talk with families about, okay, if that is going to be what you're going to do, is there a way that we can make that food item less accessible? So can you keep your soda at your office? Can you keep your soda in your car? Can you put it high up on a shelf where it is less accessible? After I kind of talk about that roadblocks and barriers like Dr. Adams was talking about. And then if it is an adolescent, little kids, it's more challenging. But if it is an adolescent, I usually talk about how, we can't control anyone else but ourselves. And so in that situation that seems really difficult and unfair, what do we have control over? And that may be, right, like maybe there is a bag of salad in your fridge, but also maybe there is like a bunch of frozen chicken nuggets, right? Well, you may have control over what am I going to make myself for this meal. So how can you sort of embrace that control? Because you're right, you don't always have control over what parents bring in.
And I try to tell them too, don't be afraid to communicate. I try to encourage families to make that grocery list together if they can. And like you said, cook, even gardening is another way too that really helps them understand where the food is coming from and how it makes us feel. So hopefully that was helpful.
Great. Thank you both, Dr. Adams and Dr. Chavez, for presenting today. It's a lot of great information. And thank you everyone for being able to attend on this Friday. Just a reminder, please complete the please make sure that you had completed the pre-survey in order to get your certificate of participation. The pre-survey must have been complete before the training, and then the post-survey will be sent out on Monday. Resources are available on our mobile app. Please download that today. And you can also access them on our website. And then here's the link to register for our PMP toolkit. The slides and recording will be sent out on Monday as well. And if there are any questions that come up, please let me know and I will send those to Dr. Adams and Dr. Chavez. Our next training will be on the female health triad in December. So I will send out more information on that soon. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful weekend. And we're so glad you're able to join us.